I learned to be invisible the year I turned 19, which was the year my mother died, and my uncle, Silas Crane, drove down from Ipswich in a hired chaise to collect me from the empty cottage above my father's old apothecary shop, and his wife, my Aunt Lavinia, sat beside him in pale grey silk and looked at me on the doorstep where I stood with my single trunk and a brown coat that had been my mother's, and said to her husband as though I were not there, "Silas, I had hoped you would be plainer than this. We shall have to manage." That was the first sentence I heard her speak. I was 19. I'm 21 now. I have lived 2 years in her house in Ipswich, and then in Bath, when my uncle's affairs required removal to a smaller establishment in Trim Street that we rented for the winter season, because my cousins Phoebe and Anne were of an age to be looked at, and I am not. To be entirely accurate, the niece of those rooms. I am the spare girl. I am the girl who carries the shawls and copies the invitation lists in a hand neater than my aunt's, and dresses my cousin's hair before the assemblies, and stays home from the assemblies because 3 young women in the same house is too many for the budget my uncle pretends he can afford. I am the girl whose meals are smaller than the others, because I have, my aunt says, a delicate stomach and ought not to overtax it. I am the girl whose library subscription was cancelled in November in front of 3 other ladies in the Bath circulating library, because, as my aunt explained to the librarian in a voice clearly pitched for those 3 ladies' ears, my niece has shown herself untrustworthy with borrowed books, and we cannot in good conscience continue to pay for what she ruins. I had not ruined a book. I had returned every volume on the day it was due. I had reread Sense and Sensibility twice in the week of November, because I was permitted only the one. And I had been gentle with it. And the librarian, a Mrs. Pell, who had known my mother in Ipswich, looked at my aunt for a long moment before she set down her pen and said, "Mrs. Crane, Miss Holloway has not so much as turned a page roughly." And my aunt smiled the small, bright smile she keeps for moments of public correction, and she said, "Mrs. Pell, you are too kind. Margaret, give the book back. We are leaving." I gave the book back. I curtsied to Mrs. Pell. I followed my aunt out into Milsom Street, into a wind that came down off the hills with rain in its mouth, and I did not cry until we were 100 yards from the library. And then I did. Only a little. And only because my aunt walked 3 paces ahead of me and would not see. That is the day. That is where this begins. Because as we left, as I curtsied to Mrs. Pell, I felt, and only felt, did not see, a man in the next aisle of the library, where the histories were shelved, set down whatever volume he had been holding, and turn to watch us go. I did not look at him. I did not know who he was for 2 days. On the second day, a Mrs. Cobb of our acquaintance came to take tea with my aunt, and during the conversation Mrs. Cobb mentioned, as Bath ladies always mention these things, that the Duke of Hexham had returned to his Pulteney Street house for the spring waters, and was seen yesterday in the pump room reading the Morning Post, and was reputed to be quite as cold a man as everyone said, and had, on Tuesday, paid the annual subscription at the circulating library for a Miss Holloway of Trim Street. The room went very quiet. My aunt set down her cup so carefully that the saucer did not ring. "There has been," she said, "a misunderstanding." "I do not see how," said Mrs. Cobb, who is not a clever woman, but is observant when her own credit is not at stake. "Mrs. Pell told me herself. The Duke walked to the desk after you left, asked the name of the young lady who had been turning in a book, paid the subscription in advance for a 12-month, and left without leaving his card. Mrs. Pell wrote Miss M. Holloway, Trim Street, in her ledger. I shall write to the librarian, my aunt said, and clarify the matter." "My dear Lavinia," Mrs. Cobb laughed in the small, precise way she laughs when she is enjoying herself. "I should not. The Duke pays his accounts. When Mrs. Cobb had gone, my aunt sat very still in her chair, and she did not look at me for a long time. And then she looked at me, and she said, in the voice she reserves for me when no one else is in the room, "Margaret, whatever you have done to draw the attention of that man, you will undo it. Do you understand?" I had not done anything. I had not looked at him. I had not, until that moment, known he existed. I said, "Yes, Aunt." I went up to my room, which is at the back of the house and looks out over a brick wall, and I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, and I took from the pocket of my gown a small enamel pillbox with a forget-me-not painted on the lid, which had been my mother's, and which she had kept her last drops of laudanum in during the autumn she died, and which I had carried empty in my pocket every day since. I held it in my palm. I did not open it. I have not opened it in 2 years. I thought, a duke paid my subscription. A duke I have never seen. There is no possible reason for it. There must be some other Miss Holloway in Bath. I went to sleep believing that. I went, the next morning, to the pump room. I went because my aunt and my cousins were going, and because I was required to go to carry my aunt's reticule and my cousin Phoebe's shawl, and to fetch glasses of the foul mineral water from the pump for whoever asked. And because my aunt had decided, after a sleepless night I had heard her pacing through, that the best response to a duke's misplaced attention was to display me publicly in such a state of subordination that no one watching could mistake me for a young lady worth pursuing. She made me wear my brown sarcenet, which is 2 seasons old and has a frayed cuff I keep hidden under my glove. She made me walk 3 paces behind her into the room. She made me stand by the wall holding her things, while my cousins, Phoebe in pale yellow, Anne in white, drank their water and curtsied to acquaintances and laughed at small witticisms. And she made certain, by a steady stream of small, audible corrections, that everyone in the pump room understood Margaret Holloway was the niece who could not be trusted not to embarrass us. "Margaret, do not slouch. Margaret, give Phoebe the shawl, she is cold. Margaret, for heaven's sake, do not stare." I did not know I had been staring. I was looking at the floor. I looked up because of the silence. The pump room had not gone silent. It does not go silent for any common cause. But a small column of silence had opened at the door, the way silence opens around an event the room is collectively deciding whether to acknowledge. And I looked up, and a man was standing in that column of silence. He was tall. He was quite tall. He had dark brown hair, cut shorter than the fashion, and a nose that had been broken once and not entirely well set. And he wore a dark blue coat without ornament, and his eyes, even from that distance, even across a room of 50 people, were the clear, hard blue of winter sky. He was perhaps 36. He was looking, with the directness of a man who has decided not to bother with subterfuge, at me. My aunt saw him. My aunt, who had been mid-sentence in some small piece of correction, stopped mid-syllable. I felt, rather than saw, her draw herself up. I felt the cameo brooch at her throat, which she touches when she is about to lie, settle into her hand. "Ladies," she said brightly, to no one in particular, "I believe we have stayed long enough." She did not move. She did not move because the Duke, and I knew then, without being told, that this was the Duke, had begun to walk toward us, and one does not, in the pump room at Bath, turn one's back on a Duke who is approaching, even if his approach is the last thing in the world one desires. He stopped 2 yards from us. He bowed to my aunt, very correctly, and he said, "Mrs. Crane, forgive my presumption. We have not been formally introduced, but I believe my sister, Lady Frances Ashworth, has had the pleasure of your acquaintance at the pump room 2 seasons ago. I am Hexam." Your Grace, my aunt curtsied. An honour. May I have the honour of an introduction to the young ladies in your party? It was not a question. My daughters. She did not gesture to me. Miss Phoebe Crane, Miss Anne Crane. The Duke bowed to each of them. He said the right things in the right order. He did not look at them for longer than courtesy required. Then he turned, very slightly, and he said, "And the young lady at your shoulder." There was a pause. "My niece," my aunt said, and the word niece did the same work the word housemaid would have done if she had used it. "Miss Margaret Holloway. She is staying with us for the season. She does not generally go about. Miss Holloway," he bowed to me. "Forgive me again. I believe a small matter of correspondence concerning a library subscription was directed to your address last week. I had hoped to call this morning to confirm it had reached you." I felt my aunt go absolutely still beside me. I felt her cameo at her throat. "Your Grace is too kind," she said, before I could speak. "There was, in fact, some small confusion at the library. My niece had not, as I had to explain to the librarian, been quite as careful with her borrowing as one might wish, and I had been obliged to suspend her subscription as a small lesson. Your Grace's generosity, while extraordinary, has, I must be frank, somewhat undone the lesson." The Duke did not look at her. He had not, since his bow, taken his eyes from me. "Miss Holloway," he said to me, as though my aunt had not spoken, "have you ever damaged a borrowed book?" "No, Your Grace." "Have you ever returned one late?" "No, Your Grace." "Then there is no lesson to undo." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He was speaking to me, and the room was listening, because the room had decided to listen, and my aunt's small, bright correction smile had begun to falter at the edges. "Mrs. Crane, I trust the subscription will be permitted to stand." "Your Grace, I trust it will be permitted to stand." "Yes, Your Grace." "Miss Holloway," he bowed to me again. "I hope you will continue to make use of the library. Mrs. Pell speaks well of your care with her books." He turned then and said to my aunt without looking at her, "Mrs. Crane, good morning." He walked away. He walked back across the pump room in his column of silence and out the door into Stall Street, and he did not look back. My aunt did not speak to me for the duration of our walk home. She did not speak to me at luncheon. She did not speak to me when I brought up the tea at 4:00. At 7 she rang for me, and I came down to the small parlour where she was sitting alone, my uncle being out. And she looked at me from across the rug, and she said, in the conversational tone she uses when she is about to be cruelest, "Margaret, I do not know what you have done. I do not know how, in 2 days, you have made yourself an object of interest to a duke who has not in 7 years shown the slightest interest in any woman in any room in England. But I will tell you this once, and I will not tell you again. He does not want you. He cannot want you. There is something about you he is using, for some purpose of his own, and when he is finished with it, he will set you down in whatever street he found you in, and I will be the one who has to clean up what is left. So you will, from this moment, refuse his calls. You will refuse his cards. You will refuse, if it should come to it, his hand. You will do this because you owe me. You owe me your bed and your bread and the gown you stand in. You will do this because you are not, my dear, the kind of girl a duke marries, and I would rather see you dead in a ditch than ruined by him in mine." I did not answer her. I did not answer her because she was very angry, and any answer I gave would be wrong. I went up to my room. I sat on my narrow bed. I took the enamel pillbox out of my pocket, and I held it in my palm. And I thought about my mother saying, "Meggie, my dear, you are worth more than you have been told." And I thought about how she had said it only at the end, only when she could no longer say much. And I thought about how perhaps she had said it because by then she was not entirely herself. And I put the pillbox back in my pocket. And I did not, that night, sleep. I went to the library the next morning before my aunt was awake. I went because the Duke had said I trust it will be permitted to stand, and because I wanted to know if my name had, in fact, been written into Mrs. Pell's ledger, and because if it had, it was the only thing in my life that was, just then, mine. It had been. Mrs. Pell, when I asked, showed me the page. Miss M. Holloway, Trim Street. Subscription paid in advance, 12 months. By the Duke of Hexham, 11th February 1817. He wrote it himself, she said. He wrote his name, he counted out the sum, and he asked me to keep his name out of it if anyone asked. I told him I would. And I would have, except that Mrs. Cobb came in not an hour later and saw the entry. And Mrs. Cobb is Mrs. Cobb. Mrs. Pell. I closed the ledger gently. Why? I do not know, Miss Holloway. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who had known my mother and had not, until this moment, known what to say to me about it. But I will say only this. I have known the Duke in passing for 4 years. He does not do things without reason. And he does not, I think, do things he cannot finish. I borrowed Persuasion and I went home. I read it in 3 days, in stolen quarter hours when my aunt did not know where I was, and in the small hours of the night with a candle stub I had hoarded. And I do not think I have ever cried so much over a book, or known so well what it was to be a woman everyone has agreed is past her best. And on the morning I returned it, Mrs. Pell handed me a note that had been left for me. It was written on plain paper, in a hand I would later learn was the Duke's, and it said only, Miss Holloway. My sister, Lady Frances Ashworth, holds her at home on Thursday afternoons in Royal Crescent. She has asked me to convey that you would be most welcome there, with or without your aunt. The invitation is hers, freely made. H. I read it 3 times. I put it inside Persuasion before I returned it, because I did not dare carry it home. And then I took it back out, and I put it inside my stays instead, because I did not dare leave it where Mrs. Pell could be questioned about it. Thursday was the next day. I went. I went because Mrs. Pell, when I told her where I was going, gave me a small bottle of rose water for the tip of my handkerchief and said, "Child, walk up there as if you belong there." And because my aunt was confined to her bed with a megrim, and because my cousin Phoebe, who is not unkind, only weak, had said to me at breakfast, "Meg, I do not understand what is happening, but I shall not tell Mamma if you go anywhere this afternoon." Royal Crescent is 20 minutes uphill from Trim Street. I walked it in 15. Lady Frances Ashworth is 39, dark-haired, sharp-faced, and wears black because she has been a widow a year and intends to remain in mourning for a second year out of, she informed me within the first minute, spite, my dear, pure spite. My husband was a tedious man, and I owe him nothing. She received me in a yellow drawing room overlooking the Crescent, and she rose as I was announced. And she crossed the room in 3 strides and took both my hands in hers and said, "Miss Holloway, Henry has told me a little. Sit down, drink something. You are too thin, and the wind off the hills today is criminal." I sat. I drank. I tried to remember what manners my mother had taught me. "Lady Frances, Frances, I am not going to Lady Frances, a girl I intend to spend the next several months entirely on the side of. Frances will do. Frances, may I ask, has His Grace, has the Duke? Henry told me, 2 days ago, that he had seen a young lady in the circulating library being publicly stripped of her subscription by an aunt who clearly intended the public part as the real lesson. He told me it reminded him of something. He told me he had paid the subscription on the way out and left no card. He told me he had then made certain inquiries about the young lady's situation and the aunt's habits. Today, he told me he had spoken to you in the pump room and confirmed his impression that you had been, and I am quoting my brother now, who is not a man given to figures, systematically dismantled by a relative in whose care you have been placed, and he asked whether I would, at very short notice, throw open my Thursdays to you. I said yes. I said yes before he finished asking. Margaret, may I call you Margaret? Meg, please. Meg. She squeezed my hands. I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly, because the next several months are going to depend on the answer. Are you afraid of my brother? No. Are you afraid of your aunt? I hesitated. You see, said Frances Ashworth with a small, sharp smile. There is the answer. Drink your tea. The Duke was not at the at-home that afternoon. He came on the Thursday afterward. He came in plain clothes, with no announcement beyond the footman's, and he bowed to his sister and to me, and he sat across the room from me for the better part of an hour, and he did not say more than 10 sentences, and at the end of the hour he rose, bowed again, and left. I had counted his sentences. They had all been to other people. None had been to me. But twice, when the conversation in the room turned to other things, I looked up and found him watching me. And once, when I rose to take Frances's empty cup to the table, he rose too, without making a thing of it, without offering, and held the door open for me when I needed to step into the corridor for a fresh pot. In the corridor, he said, very quietly, Miss Holloway, are you well? Yes, Your Grace. Is your aunt aware that you are here? No, Your Grace. Will she punish you for it? I did not answer. He looked at me for a long moment. The corridor was narrow. He was a foot away. The blue of his eyes was very clear. Miss Holloway. His voice was not soft and not hard. If, at any point, your situation in your uncle's house becomes one you cannot endure, my sister's house is open to you. There are rooms. There is a maid. There would be no impropriety because my sister is in residence. Do not exhaust yourself before you ask. Will you remember that? Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. He did not touch me. He did not so much as offer his hand. He turned and went back into the drawing room, and I stood in the corridor with the empty teapot in both hands and felt the corridor walls move, very slightly, the way a deck moves before a swell. And I thought, something is happening to me that I do not know the name of yet. I did not know its name for some weeks more. I went to Frances Ashworth's at-homes every Thursday I could escape to. I told my aunt I was at the library. I told my cousin Phoebe the truth, because Phoebe, pale, anxious, 20-year-old Phoebe, had begun, in her small way, to take my side. She covered for me. She fetched the books I would have borrowed if I had really gone to the library. She turned the conversation at the dinner table when my aunt was about to ask too sharp a question. My aunt, whose pride was greater than her observation, did not catch us out. My Uncle Silas, whose pride was smaller than his fear of his wife, may have caught us out and chosen to say nothing. I do not know. The Duke came to 2 more of his sisters' at-homes. He spoke to me a little more each time. He never once asked me to walk with him. He never once asked me to dance. There was no dancing. Those were afternoon receptions. He never once paid me a compliment. He asked me what I was reading. He asked me what I had thought of persuasion. He asked me whether I had ever been to the sea. He listened, in the way a man listens who has decided that listening is what is required of him, and his face did not move very much, but his eyes did, and the eyes were the part of him that was unguarded. On the 4th Thursday, in the corridor outside the drawing room, I stumbled. The runner had come loose from its tack, and I caught my heel in it, and I went down, not heavily, only ungracefully, onto one knee, and he was there before I had touched the floor. He had me by the elbow, then by both elbows, and he was lifting me up, and his hands closed for a moment around mine to settle me, and they were warm and large and ink-stained at the fingers, and they held mine for 1 full second longer than they needed to. He let go. I felt the absence of his hands as a small, particular pain. He said, "Miss Holloway, you should sit. You have been very pale today." "I am perfectly well, Your Grace." "You are not. Sit down. I shall fetch Francis." He fetched Francis. He did not sit beside me afterward. He sat across the room. But when I left, an hour later, Francis pressed a small parcel into my hand at the door and said quietly, "Henry asked me to give you this. Open it at home, tell no one, and at home, late at night, by the candle stub in my room." I unwrapped it and found a small linen bag of black tea, the proper black tea, the kind my aunt drinks downstairs and serves me only the second steeping of, and a folded note that said, "For your own pot. You are run down. Drink it strong. Do not give it to anyone. H." I cried. I did not entirely know why. It was only tea. 2 weeks later, my aunt found out. She found out because Mrs. Cobb, who had sat in our parlour and reported the library subscription, Mrs. Cobb, who never could resist the small pleasure of an observation, happened to be at Francis Ashworth's at home one Thursday I was also there, and saw me, and turned her head 1 degree to her left, and met my aunt at the milliner's the following morning, and said, "Lavinia, my dear, your niece is making rather a habit of Royal Crescent." I came home that day to find my aunt waiting in the front parlour with my cousin Phoebe standing white-faced behind her chair, and my aunt rose as I entered, and she struck me across the face. She had never struck me before. Phoebe made a small sound. My aunt said, in a voice quite level, "Margaret, you will not leave this house again unless I leave it with you. You will not write a letter that I have not read. You will not speak to a duke or a duke's sister or a duke's footman. You will sit in your room until I am calm enough to decide what is to be done with you. Do you understand?" I did not put my hand to my cheek. I did not speak. I went up to my room. I locked the door from inside, which I had not done in 2 years. I sat on the edge of the bed. The brass key of the lock was warm in my hand from being turned. I took the enamel pillbox out of my pocket, and I held it in my palm, and I thought, very clearly, I am 21 years old, and I am not safe in this house, and I have nowhere to go. And the Duke of Hexham told me his sister's door was open, and I do not know if I am brave enough to walk through it. I sat like that until full dark. At full dark, I heard a stone hit my window. I went to the window. I opened it. Phoebe stood in the backyard in her nightgown and a coat, her face a pale circle in the moonlight, and she said, in a whisper that carried up the brick. Meg. There is a hackney at the corner. Frances Ashworth sent it. I sent for her this afternoon when Mamma was not looking. Take only what you can carry. Go. Phoebe, your mother. My mother will deal with me when she finds you gone. I shall manage. Meg, go. I packed in 11 minutes. I packed my mother's brown coat, my second pair of stockings, my mother's pillbox, the note from Henry that I had kept inside my stays, and Persuasion, which I had borrowed again and could not bear to leave behind. I went down the back stairs. I crossed the kitchen, where the cook, a Mrs. Paget, who had also known my mother, pressed a hot bundle of bread and cheese into my hand and did not say a word. I went out the kitchen door. I crossed the yard. I climbed into the hackney at the corner. The driver, who did not look at me, said, "Royal Crescent, miss. The lady's expecting." I rode up Bath in the dark with a hot bundle of bread in my lap and tears running freely down my face, and I thought, I have done it. I have walked through the door. And then I thought, almost at once, and now I shall be a burden to him. I shall be a burden to her. I shall be the burden I have always been told I was. Frances Ashworth was waiting for me in the front hall in a black wrapper. She took my coat. She took my bundle. She put her arm around my shoulders and walked me up to a yellow bedroom whose fire had been lit and whose bed had been turned down, and she said, "Meg, you are safe. Sleep." "Frances, in the morning." I slept. I slept like the dead. In the morning, I came downstairs in a dressing gown of Frances's that was too large for me, and I came into the breakfast room, and Henry, he was Henry by then, in my own thoughts, though I had not yet said it, was sitting at the table reading a letter, and he rose when I came in and bowed, and he said, "Miss Holloway, good morning." "Your Grace." "Henry, I think, for breakfast." "Sit. Eat. Frances will be down in a moment." I sat. He poured my tea. He pushed the toast toward me, and he buttered a slice himself and put it on my plate. He did this without looking at me. He did it the way a man does a thing he has decided is required and is not going to make a small drama of. "Your aunt," he said, "called on my sister at 6 o'clock this morning." I went still. "Frances," he continued, "received her in the small parlour. I was, as it happened, also in the small parlour. Your aunt did not know I was there. She made certain accusations regarding your conduct. She made certain demands regarding your return. She spoke for some time. Frances allowed her to. At the end of it, Frances asked her to leave. She did not leave. I rose then and informed her that she was leaving. She left." He buttered another slice of toast. "She said," he added, without looking up, "a number of things about you, Miss Holloway, which I would prefer never to repeat in your hearing. I will tell you only that she is mistaken in every particular, and that the things she said to you, and about you, in your 2 years under her roof, were also, every one of them, mistaken. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not see you sooner." I did not, at first, answer him. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my tea cooling and a piece of buttered toast in front of me, and I felt the words of 2 years rise up behind my teeth. Plain, sickly, ungrateful, burden, lucky to be tolerated, not the kind of girl any man marries. And I felt them, all of them, with the entire weight of my aunt behind them, and I heard myself say, very quietly, the worst thing I had been carrying. "Your Grace, Henry, I am not worth saving." He set down the butter knife. He did not flinch. He did not look stricken. He did not rush to deny it. He did not, as I had braced myself for, give me the soft denial that would have allowed me to disbelieve it. He looked at me. The cold blue eyes were not cold then. They were only very steady. And he said, "Miss Holloway, I heard you." That was all he said. He did not argue with it. He did not reassure me. He reached for the letter he had been reading when I came in, and he refolded it, and he set it aside. And then he resumed his breakfast, and he passed me the marmalade when I had not asked for it, and he said, in the same level voice as before, "Drink your tea. We have a great deal to do today." We had a great deal to do. I did not, that day, understand what it was. I understood it only in pieces over the weeks that followed. He did not propose to me. He did not declare himself. He did not ask me a single thing I would have to refuse. What he did was this. That morning, while I was still drinking my tea, Whitley, his solicitor, arrived from London by post-chaise. He had been sent for the day before, the moment Francis had received word from Phoebe, and was shown into the study, and a settlement of £5,000 was drawn up in my name, in trust, irrevocable, with £200 a year of pin money payable to me quarterly, regardless of any other circumstance. I did not know about it for 3 weeks. I learned about it because Mr. Whitley sent me a letter in the 3rd week informing me that my first quarter's payment of £50 had been deposited into an account at Hawes in my name, and that I might draw upon it as I pleased. That afternoon, while I was lying down in the yellow bedroom because I had not yet recovered from the previous night, Frances sent her own dressmaker to take my measurements, and a bootmaker to take my measurements, and a milliner to take my measurements. I learned about this when the gowns began to arrive, 4 days later, and I tried to refuse them, and Frances said, "Meg, dear, they are not from Henry, they are from me. You are my guest, hush." I learned, much later, that they were from Henry. Francis had simply paid the bills, out of an account he had opened in her name for the purpose. That evening, while I was at supper with Francis, Henry drove down to Trim Street in his own carriage, called on my Uncle Silas, and informed him, in the small parlour where my aunt had sat that morning, that the Duke of Hexham was now Miss Holloway's protector in the formal legal sense. That any attempt by either Mr. or Mrs. Crane to communicate with her, retrieve her, or claim authority over her would be met with the full weight of his solicitors, and that, as a matter of family courtesy, he was prepared to settle Mr. Crane's outstanding debts to the Bath merchants, £340, on the single condition that Mrs. Crane never, while either of them lived, attempt to speak to me again. Mr. Crane agreed. Mr. Crane wept. My Uncle Silas did, and agreed. Henry did not tell me about that visit either. Francis told me, 6 weeks later, when my aunt had stopped trying to write to me and I was beginning to wonder why. That 2nd week, while I was learning to walk through the house in shoes that fit, Francis took me to call on 3 of her oldest friends, 3 Bath ladies of unimpeachable rank, and introduced me as her cousin, Margaret Holloway, who is staying with me through the season, and she said it firmly enough that none of the 3 ladies asked. And within a fortnight I was in their drawing rooms and their carriages and their pump room circles, and the small ripple my aunt had been preparing to send out, "Did you hear about the Crane niece? Did you hear what she has done?" broke against a sea wall I could not, at first, see. That 3rd week, while I was sitting in the library at Royal Crescent reading Mansfield Park, Henry came in with a parcel and set it on the table beside me and said, "Open this when you are alone," and went out. And I opened it that night by the fire, and inside was the enamel pillbox. My pillbox, the forget-me-not one, the one I had carried empty for 2 years, and it was no longer empty. It had been cleaned and lined with a new silk and filled, to the very top, with sugared violets. There was a folded note inside the lid. Miss Holloway, I had a sister who carried one of these. She kept in it the only thing the doctors would give her, and they were wrong to give it to her, and she died of it at 19. I have spent 7 years not saving women I should have saved. I do not think you are her. I think you are Margaret Holloway, and I think you were told, by someone who should have known better, that you were a burden. And I think it took root in you because you had no one to tell you it was a lie. I am telling you it was a lie. I am telling you as quietly as I can because I do not want you to feel obliged. Whatever is in this box is yours. Whatever is in your life from this morning forward is yours. I have not asked you for anything. I shall not ask you for anything. H. I read it twice. I closed the pillbox. I went upstairs. I went to the small back drawing room where Henry kept his correspondence, where I knew he would be, and I went in without knocking. For the first time in my life, I went into a man's private room without knocking. And he rose at once, and his face did the small, involuntary thing I had not seen it do before. And I crossed to him in 3 steps, and I said, Henry. Margaret. You wrote that you would not ask me for anything. I will not. Then I am asking. Margaret, I am asking. I am 21 years old, and I have been told for 2 years I was not worth what I was costing. And you have spent 3 weeks proving that to be a lie, without arguing with me about it once. And I do not deserve you. But I do not think I want to live the rest of my life in a house you paid for, being unable to tell you that I love you. So I am telling you. Now, before I lose the courage. I love you. He did not, even then, rush. He set down his pen. He came around the desk. He took my face in his hands, the large, ink-stained hands, and he tipped my chin up, and he said, Margaret Holloway, listen carefully. You did not deserve what you were told. You do deserve me. You also deserve the truth, which is this. I have loved you since the morning you stood in the breakfast room and told me you were not worth saving. And I knew, in the time it took you to say it, that I would spend the rest of my life proving the sentence false. Will you marry me? Yes. He kissed me. He kissed me in the small back drawing room, with the late afternoon light coming yellow through the windows of Royal Crescent, and the city of Bath rolling away below us. And he kissed me as a man kisses a woman he has decided to be patient with for the rest of her life. And the enamel pillbox was in my pocket, full of sugared violets, and the brass key of my old bedroom in Trim Street was somewhere I would never see again. And I was crying. And so, I think, was he. Only a little. We were married 8 weeks later, in the small chapel at Henry's Seat in Northumberland, with Frances in dark plum, because she had decided her year of mourning was concluded and had required a new gown for the occasion, and my cousin Phoebe in pale blue beside me as my only bridesmaid. Frances had brought her up from Ipswich the week after my aunt had been informed of my settlement, and Phoebe had not gone back. Phoebe was, by then, residing with Frances in Royal Crescent, and being prepared, with a kindness she had not previously known, for a season in London the following spring. Mrs. Paget, the cook, came up from Bath in a borrowed black gown to attend. Mr. Whitley signed the register. My Uncle Silas was not there. He had written, asking to be permitted to come, and I had written back saying I should not like it, and Henry had not pressed me. My aunt did not write at all. We learned, much later, that she had withdrawn to a small property near Bury St. Day, Edmonds, and was not received by any of her former acquaintance. Phoebe wrote to her. I did not. I do not, I think, owe her that. A year passed. I was by then living in the house Henry had built me. Not literally. He had not built a new house, he had given me his. And I was, by then, expecting our first child. And I was sitting on a stone bench in the garden at Hexham one evening in the late summer of 1818, with Henry beside me. And Frances was inside, writing to Phoebe in London, where Phoebe was being a great success at her first London season under Frances's patronage. And I had the enamel pillbox in my pocket, as I always had it, only it was no longer a thing I carried, because it was the only thing I had. It was a thing I carried because it was full of sugared violets, and Henry replaced the violets every Sunday, and the pillbox had become, over the year, the small daily proof of a love I had finally, slowly, in the way I do most things, learned to believe in. Henry took my hand. He said, "Margaret." "Yes?" "You said something to me 1.5 years ago in a breakfast room in Bath." "I remember." "Was I right not to argue with it?" "You were right." "Why?" I thought about it. I watched the light on the lawn go gold and then begin to go grey. I watched Henry's face, the broken nose set imperfectly, the dark hair beginning to grey a little above the ears, the blue eyes that had been the first part of him I knew, the ink-stained hands that had buttered toast for me on the worst morning of my life, and had never, since that morning, gone empty of small, careful things to do for me. And I said, "Because if you had argued with it, I would have argued back. I had 2 years of arguments ready. You would have spent the rest of our lives chipping away at them sentence by sentence, and I would have spent the rest of our lives waiting to be convinced. You did not chip away at anything. You acted, every day, as though the sentence were already false. You loved me before I could believe in it. That is the only thing that could have worked. I think you knew that. I think you had, once, known a girl you could not save by arguing, and you had decided that morning you would not lose me the same way." He did not answer. He turned my hand over in his, and he kissed the inside of my wrist where the small old scar was, the one from a glass jar in my father's apothecary when I was 14, and he said only, "I am very glad, Margaret. I am so very glad." The pillbox was warm in my pocket. The sugared violets inside it would last another 5 days, and on Sunday Henry would replace them, and on the Sunday after that, and on every Sunday, for as long as we both lived, he would replace them. And one of the things I had not yet told him, but would tell him before the child came, because there were no more secrets between us I needed to keep, was that I had not, in 1.5 years, opened the pillbox to eat one. I had carried it. I had felt it in my pocket. I had taken it out and turned it in my hand at small bad moments and put it back. The violets inside it were not for eating. They were a sentence in a language my aunt had not taught me, and my mother had only had the strength to begin. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. And on the bench in the garden, with Henry's hand around mine, I understood that I had, finally, learnt to read it.